So there's a real difference between how organizations plan change and how their people experience it. A lot of organizational planning for change focuses on the structures and processes that we're trying to create, but very few organizations really think about what people are going to be thinking and feeling about the change itself. And in fact, there's also a real difference between how leaders kind of push change into organizations, sort of apply force, make sure that they're supervising the change, create a lot of mandates, and how you can create change by creating a gravity that attracts people to join the change. We call this the pull transformation. So there's a real difference between push and pull. And I often feel that if you're trying to drive change and all you're doing is pushing change, pushing change, pushing change. I remember even having a conversation with leaders in a workshop. And in that workshop, I was asking them how they drive change. And one of them said, I drive change with a sjambok. And what he meant was that he carries his force and his will and he pushes people to change. But actually, as the conversation evolved, we learned that if leaders drive change in that way, then it's actually less likely to stick because people are only doing things because they're being closely supervised. But what you want is to actually create change in a way that attracts people to join. And so you want to create gravity. So how do you do that? And I want to make this distinction between push and pull just to show you how you can do that. So let's think about how you start the change movement, right? In some situations, I've seen leaders start change by having this big, massive launch event to try and create buzz. This can have some effect, but it may not be as effective as you want, right? You're going too big too soon. I think the best way to start change in a way that creates momentum, creates gravity, is to start by doing discovery. Start by talking to stakeholders, learning about their needs and challenges, learning about what's important to them. If you actually start the process by doing discovery, you also create a reputation for yourself as someone who cares about what people think. And so people are far more likely to engage with you later on when you come back with your ideas about how you want to drive the initiative. Now, let's think a little bit about how we want to scale that change once we start. In a lot of companies that I've worked with, the change is company-wide from the beginning. It starts at a big scale from the beginning. Get everyone involved, get everyone participating. And that's a very difficult way to drive change because you're trying to do, again, too much too soon. It's always better to start with early adopters and work with those early adopters to get early wins. And then those early wins become the creators of momentum. They become the thing that attracts people to join the movement. Because if you're telling stories about some wins you already have inside the organization, it gets easier for you to attract people to join the work that you're trying to actually accomplish. So now let's talk a little bit about the narrative of change and how do you actually create an attractive narrative for change. I remember when I first started doing this work, we would walk around with a PowerPoint presentation. We haven't started doing any work at all inside the organization. We're just trying to convince people to join the work that we're doing. We haven't got an early win. We haven't got early adopters. We're just walking around the organization doing presentation after presentation after presentation, just walking around with this slide deck. And that's like climbing uphill. That's actually really, really difficult. So like I said before, it's better to start with early adopters, get the early win, and then use that narrative. The storytelling, the success stories are actually a much better way to sort of create the gravity that attracts people to join the work that you're trying to do. And then let's talk about how you get a mandate for change, right? And this takes me back right to the beginning where leaders are driving change through directives and instructing people on what to do. But how about creating social proof? Just getting endorsements from other leaders, getting people to come and speak to people from outside the organization, creating those early wins, getting early adopters, just creating that kind of social proof that allows people to feel comfortable to join. When people are trying to decide whether or not to be part of change, they worry about a lot of things. They worry about whether the change is going to be successful. And so early wins help you with that. They're worrying about whether or not leaders really want to change. So getting endorsement from other leaders creates that social proof. And so sometimes people are limited by this fear that the change may not be successful, that they may not be able to actually do it. And so the more and more evidence that you can show that the change is having traction within the organization, the more likely you are to create this pull, this gravity that brings people into the change. So again, think about that, right? You can push change if you want, but pushing is a lot of effort and may not actually work, or you can pull people into the change that you're trying to drive by creating gravity and momentum.